Hey guys, welcome back. So today, working on this 5500 watt Chicago electric generator. This one came to me from a subscriber. He gave it to me, and the story I'm told is that a friend gave it to him after it stopped making power, and it's still not making power. So yeah, a generator that doesn't make power really doesn't serve much purpose. So hopefully I can get that issue sorted out. And if I do, there are a lot of other things that need to be dealt with. And I guess first off, this generator is only 11 years old. You can tell just by looking at it that it's been stored outdoors for quite some time. The paint is pretty faded. A lot of the hardware has rust on it. The tank, there's a bad smell coming from it. And if you look on the underside of the cap, that's a big clue that the fuel is bad. And yeah, if you look in there, you can see bad fuel, maybe a bit of water, and definitely some rust. So that is not a good situation. This here is the tank vent. It's supposed to be installed right there, but it looks like the rubber bushing is missing, and someone already made an attempt to fix that. So that we'll have to deal with. And looking at the front here, there's a number of things that stand out. I guess first off, these switches do not look factory. The original switch most likely would have been a key for the electric start, and that's been replaced by a push button and a toggle switch, most likely to kill spark. Down here is probably the most concerning thing, is a cap that's on a threaded pipe that was put in the place of the oil dipstick. And this cap, it looks like just a cap that you'd see on like an oil bottle, and it doesn't even thread on here properly. So that definitely needs to be dealt with before trying to start the engine. On the engine side, things look pretty normal. We have an engine that turns over freely and has good compression. The throttle, although it looks rusted, it does move. So that's good. Assuming it starts, it should have control of the engine speed. And I doubt it's going to start given what's in the tank. So that carburetor, I'm sure, has to be gone through. This side looks to be pretty complete. Don't see any issues here. And of course, the Powerhead side, that is the big issue. So I'm going to break out the multimeter. We'll check a few things, see if there's any red flags, and go from there. I'm going to start by doing the easy thing, which is just testing the resistance of leg 1 and leg 2. This is a 240 volt generator, which means it has two 120 volt circuits that, when they're wired together in series, will produce 240 volts. So you want to check both of them to make sure they are consistent in the ohms reading. Now this one, I don't know the exact reading that it should be, but usually on Honda clones of this size, I see between 0.2 and 0.5 ohms. So let's see what this one is. And before testing, set your multimeter to ohms and touch the leads together to see what the resistance is of your leads. In this case, the resistance is 0.1 ohms, but some meters, it's quite a bit higher. So you want to keep that in mind because the values we're measuring are pretty low. And if your meter is starting at 0.6 ohms, then any reading you take is going to be above kind of that reject of 0.5 ohms. So once you know what that value is, you can subtract that from any reading you get to get the true value. To do these tests, I like using the 240 volt outlet, but you could use the 120 outlets. You just need to know which one is leg 1 and which one is leg 2. But on this outlet, it's pretty easy to make that determination because the one with this tab, that's the ground, opposite is neutral, then you have leg 1 and leg 2. So if I put one of the probes in the neutral, I can then test the other two legs. And hopefully it's 0.5 ohms or less. So we're at 0.5 ohms. That is a little high, but when you subtract the 0.1, we're now at 0.3, 0.4. So that seems good. Let's check the other leg. We're at 0.5, 0.4. Subtract the 0.1, we're at 0.3, 0.4 again, which is good. So they are consistent. And now if you check between leg 1 and leg 2, you should see twice the value. In this case, it's going to be somewhere around 0.6 to 0.7. And we're at 0.8. You subtract the 0.1, we're at 0.7. So yeah, no red flags here. The stator seems to be good. At least it's not open circuit or very high resistance. But to dig any further, we need to pull the end cover off that power head. That's not a good sign. So far, so good. From what I can see, the lacing looks good. Don't see any burnt wires. So no obvious sign of a problem here. Let's get the AVR, with the automatic voltage regulator, out of the way, and that'll give a better view of the stator. I can tell someone's definitely been in here because this is usually zip tied out of the way. And these neutral wires are usually connected right here. So it is a little bit odd, but I don't see anything wrong. Yeah, the stator looks good. Copper color is good. Lacing's not broken. I don't see any hot spots or anything burned through. So visually, there's no smoking gun here. So I am going to need the multimeter to test each winding to make sure it's good. But before I can do that, I need to finish isolating the windings. So I need to unplug this and also disconnect these wires right here. And then we can get an accurate test of everything in this power head. I will say all those nuts were quite loose. Going to do a very similar test. I'm just checking the ohms of the different windings here. And just to get your bearings, there are 4 wires coming out of the stator. These are sleeved together, the blue and the red, and then you have this darker red and white. So leg 1 and leg 2 are those sets of wires. We have, this is most likely a center tapped winding, providing power to either the charging system or maybe the fuel solenoid. So we'll double check that winding as well. Here's another winding that did go to the bridge rectifier to make DC voltage, and this one went to the AVR. The blue wires are what supply power to the AVR, and the yellow and the white is what the AVR uses to monitor the output and make adjustments based on that. So let's just start with the main windings again. I'm gonna put the probe on the white wire, and I'm going to check it to ground. I want to make sure there's no connection to ground, and there's not. So there's no ground fault there. The red wire is part of the same winding. We'll skip that. Let's go to blue. Check that to ground. And we have a connection to ground. So let's just be sure. I'm going to pull the blue off. Interesting. No connection to ground. So this red wire was kind of close to hitting other things, so maybe that's what it was. But let's just put this back. We'll double check it again like that. Okay. There's no connection to ground, so that's good. It looks like the two main circuits are good. Let's check one of the blue wires to ground. Actually, we'll check between the blue wires first, make sure that's good. Should be around 1.5 ohms, plus or minus a bit. And we're at 2.3. Seems a little high, but that might be okay on this generator. No connection to ground. And the yellow and white usually go back to one of the main legs, which it does. And we've already tested that, so we know it's good. And usually the other wire goes to the other leg, or sometimes the same leg. In this case, it's the same. So yeah, I don't think we have an issue there. We already checked that to ground. Blue, I don't think we checked that to ground, did we? No connection to ground. And between the brown wires, I'm guessing that we're going to see a value going through the center tap. So we got 0.6. So now if I check it to the black, it's probably about half that. And it is. We'll check it to the other brown. It should be about the same. And it is. We'll check it to ground. No issue there. So the main winding seems good. The AVR winding. This, which provides power probably to the fuel solenoid. And this is the DC circuit. There's actually DC output on the front of this generator, so it might be used there. I don't know what the resistance should be on this, but it's coming in at 0.3. Let's check it to ground. No issues there. So this is actually good. Everything seems reasonable. None of the insulation has failed to ground. Potentially, the insulation could have failed not to ground, but to kind of adjacent coils. So we'll check that in a minute. But first, I'm going to check the rotor by putting these leads on the slip rings and see what that comes in at. Usually, it's between 40 and 70 ohms, but it varies a bit depending upon how dirty the slip rings are. So let's see what we get. So usually I see between 40 and 70 ohms on the slip rings. And in this case, we're at 34 ohms. So that is a little bit low. Might be okay for this generator, but it is a little low. Let's check it to ground. And there is a 3.3 million ohm connection to ground. And climbing. So that is questionable. I guess the ohms on the slip rings are a little low. There shouldn't be a connection to ground. And there is one, not a great one. I think the rotor would still work like this. So maybe there's a bit of moisture in there. Maybe it's some carbon dust creating that ground. I'm not sure, but that so far is the only thing suspicious here. I'm going to check each of these windings to each other. So leg 1 to leg 2, there should be no connection. There's not. I'll do it to the DPE winding. Good, no connection. The center tap on this winding, which is the black. No connection. And this green winding, which is the main DC out on the front panel. No connection, so that's good. We'll check it now from leg 2 to the DPE. No connection. No connection. And no connection. So it's looking promising. I'll do DPE. Looks good. Good. Yeah. So I would say actually this stator 100% is good. The rotor, a bit of a question mark, but based on the reading, even at 3 million ohms to ground, I would expect it to power up. So I say I put all these wires back the way they were, fix that oil fill, and get this thing started. Okay, I'm going to leave it like this. Everything's secured enough to test it. But before I do that, I need to sort out that oil situation. All right, hopefully this pipe wasn't epoxied in or something stupid like that. Oh, it's turning. Yeah, it was on there by one thread. And there's not a lot of oil in there. I do see oil though, but it's definitely on the low side. So we'll top that off. But first, let's just make sure I have a dipstick that fits. This is from one of those blown up Predators I made a video on a while ago. I got 3 Predators, 2 were blown. But the oil fill cap fits perfectly. So yeah, let's top that off, and then I'm going to try to start it. Not with the gas in the tank. I'll use an external tank, and hopefully that carb can still do something. The fuel valve was off, so there is a chance this carb might be clean. And the drain bolt was actually fairly loose, so I am not the first one to take that off. Okay, good. Looks like it was stored without fuel in the carburetor, so that is a good sign, but I am going to let it drip a bit. I do smell really bad fuel dripping out of there, so once that's empty, I'm just going to pull the line going to the tank, connect it to external fuel supply, and we'll give it a try. It's been dripping for a while. Why do I have a feeling this is plugged? Yep. All right, I take that back. There was fuel in the carburetor and just the drain was clogged. Which is not a good sign. Wow. Thank you to the subscriber who sent me those hose pliers. Amazing, the difference. This is what came out of the carburetor, a bit of debris and some bad fuel, but no water, surprisingly. Anyway, I'm gonna open up the fuel valve on the external fuel supply. I wanna make sure that fuel is making it to the carburetor, and that's gonna flush out whatever junk is left in there. So yeah, it looks like we do have fuel flow, so that is good. I'd say this has a decent chance of starting. So let me get set up a little bit better with a light, and we'll put that drain back in, and we'll try starting it. So what do you think? Is the engine gonna run? And is it gonna make power? I think definitely maybe on at least one of those. So let's start it, or at least try, and see what happens. Is up on or is up off? I'm not sure. Okay, not too bad. And to answer that question, up is on. And it started. The engine actually ran well, and the light was trying to come on. And surprisingly, we were getting about 10 to 13 volts out. And when I shut the switch off as the engine was powering down, the light actually came on pretty bright. So I'm leaning towards an AVR problem rather than anything else at this time. So I'm going to grab another AVR, plug it in, and try this again. Yeah, we got a few to choose from here. Well, maybe not that one. It says bad. So we have a few here. I think I'll just pick one, plug it in. It really shouldn't matter as long as the capacitor is rated the same. Usually it's 470 microfarad. And that's usually what I see on these generators from the 5,000 to 8,000 watt range. So I would suspect any one of these should work. So let's give one a try. I'm going to give this one a try. I can't actually read the microfarad rating on this capacitor. And it's a little weird too. The paper should be wrapped around the top. You can kind of see that here, but that's not the case. So yeah, maybe this one just has a bad capacitor, potentially. These wires, they are polarity sensitive, so make sure the positive wire goes on the left terminal. All right, let's try that. And that would be a no. The AVR does not seem to be the issue. It actually did worse because I didn't see that light come on at all, but I didn't want to leave it on very long either if there is something wrong with that power head. So I'm going to double check my work down on the power head because clearly I think I missed something. I just double checked the stator health using the multimeter. Didn't find any faults to ground again. No shorts to adjacent coils. So I'm kind of scratching my head on this one. I have a feeling I'm missing something important. I did swap out the AVR again, and this time I left some of the auxiliary windings disconnected. So right now only the stator's connected and the AVR, and that's the minimum you need to get power. So I'm going to try starting this again. To be honest, I'm not expecting a different result. I think there is something wrong with that power head. Pretty much the same thing. The light was just faintly flickering. The generator could not power up. So I'm fairly certain it is a ground fault that I couldn't really detect. Although I did detect a fault in the rotor. It was around, well, less than 3 million ohms, which is low, but I still would have expected it to power up, even with 3 million ohms connection to ground. But I'm thinking that, yeah, that might be the issue here. So unfortunately, I think this does need a new power head. It's not sitting well with me that a 3 million ohm connection to ground on the rotor would cause this to not power up. So I went to double check it. One lead on ground, the other on one of the brush terminals. And now we're getting 32 ohms to ground. So yeah, the rotor, it is bad. And because of that, this cannot power up. I'm at a bit of a crossroads as far as what to do about this generator. It needs a new power head. I only have one that'll fit. And it's a brand new 5500 watt one, so it's a perfect replacement. But it is brand new. It's a $200 power head. And I kind of hate to put it on here because this, in this condition, I'd be lucky to get $200 even if it worked. So putting that power head on here may not be the best idea. The alternative would be to take this engine and the new power head and drop it in on this frame, which is in good condition. I have a gas tank for it, which is also in good condition, but this isn't a slam dunk either because this says it's 7,250 watts, which that generator is not. It's 5,500 watts. So at a minimum, I'd have to switch out these 30 amp circuit breakers for 25 amp circuit breakers to make it safe, and then do something with that label, or just leave it the way it is and disclose it when I'm selling it. But those aren't the only issues. Because the power head is physically smaller by about an inch, then that means these mounts for the engine and the stator, they're not going to line up. They're going to be an inch too far apart. And that's also going to cause issues with the exhaust and where it mounts. So I'm going to have to give this a little bit of thought as far as which approach to take. Before I get the power head off, I think I'm going to drain the tank, get that tank out of the way, and then the exhaust has to be removed because it's actually secured by the power head. And once that's uninstalled, we should be able to get that power head off. We started off pretty well, but it is barely coming out at this point. And the tank's not completely empty. There's still some fuel in there, so it is clogged up. So yeah, I think I'll just shut this off, get the tank uninstalled. We'll just get the fuel petcock off and dump the rest into this bottle. How is that even possible? I think that's it. There's still a lot of junk in there, so I'm rinsing the tank out a bit with some fresh gas. I try to reuse as much old fuel as possible, but some stuff just can't be saved. So this is definitely going to be recycled in the hazardous waste. The tank, after only a few minutes of running some clean fuel through it, you can see the tank is cleaning up pretty well. So this tank is definitely reusable. I think we're ready to go here. I've got all the wires disconnected again. Really the only thing left is to free the stator mounts from the frame and support the engine with some wood. And then we can take the bolts out and use the puller to slide that stator off. Don't even need a wrench for this one. I've been looking this over really carefully, trying to find where the ground fault is. It's an unusual way for a rotor to fail. Usually they fail when the solder joint breaks or the wire connecting over to there breaks due to the vibrations. But, in this case, the wire is actually sleeved, and I don't see anywhere where it's making contact. And you can see it's insulated pretty well. I mean, it's basically in a plastic shell, each coil. We have some turns here and here, but again, it's on plastic. And really the only opportunity I see for it to ground out would be where it connects over to the slip rings, but those connections look clean. So I was hoping maybe to fix this one. I don't see where the ground fault is. All right, change of plan. I just checked my stash of rotors, and this one seems to be the winner because it matches in every dimension that's important. They both came from Honda clones, so they accept the same type of tapered shaft. The diameter of the ball bearings are matched, as well as the fan and the body of the rotor. The actual length has to match as well. And it's a perfect match. So, yeah, I think we're going to do the easy thing here and put this one on, use the old frame, and this repair is not going to cost anything. But let's just double check the resistance, make sure it's between 40 and 70 ohms. And we're at 53, that's perfect. And no connection to ground. So this is a very healthy rotor. It should be a direct replacement for that one. And maybe an upgrade as well. It has a metal fan. And I noticed while spinning this ball bearing, it's a little crunchy, but this one, it's perfect. So let's get this rotor installed. We'll put that stator back on and give it another go. Although first, I think I'm going to blow this out. There's a bunch of leaves, I think, in there. And we'll clean up this bottom rail because we're not going to have access to it later like we do now. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't count my chickens before they hatch. Even though this rotor seemed to be good, the fan, it's bottomed out against the bell housing, and now it won't rotate. So, unfortunately, I think this rotor is out. So, let me get this off. I'm just going to double check everything else that I have to see if there's anything better. Unfortunately, I don't have a rotor that fits any better than the one that I thought did. Even though every dimension seemed to match, there is one important difference here, and that is where the taper starts. This is the bad rotor, and you can see the taper starts almost at the same level as the fan. And if you look at this other one, it's recessed quite a bit, at least 1/3 of an inch. So the tapered shaft, it wasn't even engaging before this fan bottomed out against the bell housing. So I think we're back to the original plan. I'm going to get that engine onto the Predator frame. We'll install the Ryobi Powerhead, which I already double checked. The taper looks a lot more like this, so I think we'll be okay. And we'll build ourselves a Predator. I'm going to take a second and just drain the oil before pulling the engine off the frame, because when installing the new Powerhead, most likely I'm going to use gravity to my advantage and stand the engine up to let that Powerhead drop in place. But if the oil's in there, there's a chance it could spill out of the breather. Wow, that was on there pretty tight. Oil looks to be really good. There's no metallic in there, no bits of metal, and the oil doesn't look that old, so I think it was changed relatively recently, so that is a good sign. I'm not able to lift the engine off because it's interfering with the control panel here. So I do need to get that off. There should only be 2 bolts on each side holding it in. At this point, all the wires have been disconnected. So it should be as easy as removing these, and this should just come right off. It's a different size. Yeah, that wasn't too bad. So we are completely disassembled, at least as far as we need to be at this point. So before I start putting things back together, I do want to get that rotor up on the bench. I want to try unwinding it to see if I can't find where the fault is. And second thought, I'm not going to unwind this The wires, they are coated in an enamel and they're kind of glued together, so you really can't just unwind it without causing more damage. But I do want to get the plate off on both sides, because a failure under this plate to ground would definitely cause the issue we're seeing. So there's a plate on each side. Let's get that off, get this insulating paper off, and see if there's any clues under there. Nothing obvious there, but let's just check it to ground now that the plate is removed. And there's a high connection to ground. Still a connection, but it's very high. Now it's infinite. Interesting. So yeah, the connection to ground, it is still there. It changes a lot as far as how bad that short is to ground. Interesting. There's absolutely no connection to ground anymore. So the failure is somewhere right here. I'm not sure what to think about this one. The connection to ground, it is definitely gone. And I've been probing around while keeping one of the leads on a slip ring to these wires that are pretty shallow here. And I haven't gotten a hit. So, yeah, I don't think the failure is on the surface here. And I even put the plate back on, torqued it back down, still no ground fault. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on here, but even if there was a failure in the insulation right here, the back of the plate, it's insulated pretty well. So I don't think it would pick up the ground from there. My best guess is that when this plate is torqued down in place, it's actually pushing the wires down. And you can see this plastic insulation, it doesn't go all the way through. It stops in the middle. So it might be enough to push this bundle of wire up against the metal on either one of these sides, and that is what is creating that intermittent ground fault. So I think I'm going to stick to the original plan and not use this rotor. I don't think it's going to be very reliable. Well, guys, I think that's about it for now. It's pretty late at night and I'm going on vacation bright and early in the morning, but we've made a lot of progress. We've heard the engine run, it sounds good, and somehow that carburetor is actually running the engine well despite what we saw in the tank. We got to the bottom of why this generator was not making power, and yeah, this frame, it's really not as bad as I thought it was. I think the biggest issue is just the sun fading, the rust. You know, the tank isn't great, and the control panel's been hacked up. So my hope is to use the Predator frame. It's in great shape. It has a good tank, and I even have a wheel kit for it. But there is going to be some complications to that, and potentially it's not going to work out. So either way, it will end up on one of these frames. So until next time, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.